are you your own worst enemy? Meaning, are you standing in your own way? A lot of the women that we talk to here on breakthrough calls and work with as clients realize that they are standing in their own way to a certain degree. But at the same time, there are many people who believe that their circumstances, especially when we're talking about relationships, are a cause or actually a result of their ex's behavior or a result of their childhood conditioning, and tend to stay in blame for a long period of time. And we, often see this in clients that we work with. The blame, I was just listening to a podcast, living in blame, the host was saying, is the greatest version of crack. So when you live in blame, it gives you a temporary feeling of relief. You get to be right while your ex is wrong. You get to diagnose your ex with all of the NPD behaviors or BPD behaviors, whatever the case may be. And you get to absolve yourself of responsibility to a certain extent. You may have realized I ignored a lot of red flags in the beginning, but still I didn't deserve this treatment. And blame will keep you stuck for a very, very long period of time. And I didn't want to get into this episode today just to talk about blame. But I want to highlight here that if you are blaming your ex still, or constantly talking about what he did to you, or maybe you still have to deal with your ex because of a divorce or co-parenting issues, that every time you talk about what your ex is not doing right, or what your ex did to you in the past that was very wrong, that caused you so much pain, you are really just reliving the past. And on a neurological and biological level, you are programming your brain literally to fire and wire the same neurology that was associated with the pain in the past. So I want to talk about a concept called familiarity bias. Somebody reached out to me on Instagram asking if I could talk about this. Familiarity bias is essentially a concept where we tend to go with what's familiar. Familiarity bias happens in a lot of different aspects in our lives. If you invest money, you may tend to invest in certain stocks that are more secure and less risky. You may, if you go to the grocery store, you may buy the same types of products or the same types of brands because it's what's familiar for you. When we talk about selecting a relationship or a romantic partner, you may have had therapy before and you may have heard this concept that you go with what's familiar. So familiarity bias is a very real thing. You may even have a type physically that you tend to be drawn to. And if you tend to be drawn to a certain type, but that type is not good for you, it might be wise to question your own familiarity bias. So familiarity bias, in the terms of in the context of a relationship setting, tends to be you tend to be programmed early on in childhood through experiences that you had. And because you don't have a filter as a child to discern what is right and what is wrong, you take on everything as true. You grow up with the belief or the meaning about a relationship, and maybe you didn't get your needs met, or maybe your parents were fighting all of the time, or maybe you had to work really hard to feel loved by one of your parents and you had to prove your worth. When you're a child, you don't realize that that way is wrong. And so as you continue to move through your life, you continue to play out that pattern, and that will show up most definitely in your relationships. So we tend to select our partners unconsciously by our old unhealed wounding, our past trauma, or the conditioning that we learned in childhood. The familiarity bias piece is that we go with what's familiar. Now, here's the even more interesting thing. When you go with what's familiar, whether that is selecting an unavailable partner or selecting a narcissistic partner, selecting somebody who constantly criticizes you, you begin to form what's called your identity around that. This is why a lot of people that we talk to who've had a lot of talk therapy, don't necessarily see changes in their love lives or the relationships because they create and they anchor the identity that I had a bad childhood, therefore relationships are going to be harder for me. And that's just the way it is. When you have familiarity bias and you choose the same type of person over and over again, the circuits in your brain, the neural pathways in your brain associated with that pattern become shorter and they become thicker. So the synapses don't have to travel as far in your brain to associate with those thoughts. And they become thicker, meaning they're like well-worn. It's like a well-worn freeway, like the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, if you're familiar. It's like 6 lanes on both sides. It's constantly packed. So if your story that you tell yourself is, I have a broken picker and every guy that I meet, I can't trust myself, or you continue to relive the story of what your ex did to you, the neurons, you're not only, number one, you are reinforcing your familiarity bias. Number two, you are reinforcing the psychology on a neurological level associated with your pain. You're not actually creating new circuits in your brain or new feeling states in your nervous system that are going to lead you to the kind of relationship that you want, let alone lead you to feeling happy and confident and secure with yourself. So familiarity bias may be a big thing that is keeping you stuck and consciously or unconsciously making you your own worst enemy. So every time you talk about what your ex did to you, and this is why for a lot of people, talk therapy is great. I don't want to like poo-poo it, but you need to have the right kind of therapist or coach. For some people, talk therapy, they just don't want to keep revisiting the past. They want to start moving forward. This is where coaching comes into play. But if you find that you're continuing to relive the story again and again and again in your mind, through therapy or through, complaining to your friends, or you're not getting the results that you want in your love life, it is time to be aware that every time you retell the story of what your ex did to you, or you rethink the story of what your ex did to you, or you research narcissism and you put those symptoms in alignment with what your ex did to you, or you think about, I will never have a good partner. Will I ever have a good relationship? There's something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me. Every time you tell yourself those stories, you are anchoring that familiarity bias, and you are literally programming yourself in your brain by like just continuously creating those shortened, stronger, thicker neural connections that are associated with your pain. You're just reconditioning the same stuff and re-anchoring the same stuff. And this is why, from a CPTSD or complex trauma lens, traditional talk therapy keeps a lot of people stuck in that same identity. And then what's even worse about this is that if you continue to tell the same stories and you're doing the right thing, you're in therapy, but you continue to rehash the past and continue to talk about all the bad things that have happened to you, but you're not making any progress, that gap in your progress can reinforce the belief in the identity that something is wrong with me. I had somebody comment recently on a Facebook ad that said, I used to, and she had done a lot of therapy, more than a decade, I believe, and her experience in therapy was that she was placing too much responsibility on the therapist to cure her like a medical doctor, or to cure her like taking a prescription drug. And she wasn't taking responsibility for her own actions. And the other thing was that she kept feeling like, because she wasn't making progress, or she wasn't really getting anywhere, that she continued to feel like a failure. And so in the terms of complex trauma or CPTSD, simply doing talk therapy and doing talk therapy alone can be a limiting factor in your progress, because, like I said, if you're reanalyzing the past or retelling those same stories, you are, number one, conditioning that familiarity bias, and number two, on a neurological level, you are strengthening those neural connections associated with the pain and the identity of a woman who only attracts unhealthy relationships and who has a lot of experiences and references in her life that only lead her to unhealthy relationships. So you have to make the decision to break that pattern, and you have to make the decision to do the hard work that is required to refire and rewire how you think and how you feel. And we'll talk about that later. But that's one of the main reasons and the main causes that you may be stuck right now and literally be your own worst enemy. It's not, I hear a lot of people say, I'm too old. I live in a small town. There are not many men in my area. I've got too much baggage. The men my age are not very open anymore. They're not progressive. There's all kinds of reasons or excuses that I hear a lot of people saying. But at the end of the day, it comes down to two things: getting out of blame, number one, and then shifting your familiarity bias and shifting your psychology about what you believe is possible for you. And if you've had 20 or 30 or more years of unhealthy relationship experiences, it's a tall order. It's not an easy thing to do. It's possible. It's very, very possible, but it's not necessarily easy. And at the end of the day, that familiarity bias tends to want to take over because, again, those synapses in your brain are shorter, they fire quicker, and they're thicker, they fire stronger than the new stuff that you want to create. So that's the first point that I want to make for you this morning. So the second thing, your familiarity bias, the stories that you tell yourself, create your subconscious beliefs and your emotional home. We work with this extensively and break the cycle with clients on shifting their subconscious beliefs and how they live emotionally every day, how they feel every day. So if you're constantly feeling like something's wrong with you, or maybe you're recovering from another narcissistic breakup, or you're trying to figure out who you are again after a divorce, you may be living with a lot of guilt, you may be living with a lot of shame, you may be living with anxiety or fear. Most people, their emotional home on a daily basis is somewhere along the lines of unhappiness. They don't feel truly happy. And most people cope with not feeling very happy in unhealthy ways. You may be trying to cope right now by being chronically busy, by numbing yourself with busyness, by just feeling scattered and not focused. You may be numbing yourself with a few glasses of wine every night. You may be numbing yourself by staying busy on your phone or just kind of numbing yourself on social media. All of these are ways that will keep you stuck and keep your emotional home just kind of like flatlining. If you feel shame or generally unhappy, or you just feel empty, or you don't feel like you're connecting with anybody, your emotional home is directly related to what you believe about yourself subconsciously. So if you're constantly thinking, I'm never going to meet anybody, or you're questioning, will I ever meet anybody? Should I just resign myself to the fact that I'm going to be alone forever? Every time you think those thoughts, your body has a neurochemical reaction. You have a feeling, you have an emotion, and your brain fires hormones and chemicals into your bloodstream by way of neuropeptides. And every time you do that, your body has a visceral reaction. The problem with this is that the more you have shame-based or fear-based or unhappy-based thoughts and feelings, the more that becomes your norm. And the more that becomes your norm, the less you believe and see a different reality for yourself. And you'll continue to stay stuck. And the more shame and fear and numbing that you do to escape your shame and your fear, you are just going back to point number one, reinforcing your familiarity bias and reinforcing that identity as a woman who never feels enough, as a woman who inherently feels unlovable and who feels like she has to prove and work harder to get where she wants to go in life. So familiarity bias is point number one. Are you unconsciously keeping yourself stuck by reliving the stories of your past, by continuing to tell yourself the story, I have a broken picker, I'm never going to meet anybody, what's the point? or continuing to relive the story of what your ex did to you. Every time you relive those stories, you're anchoring that familiarity bias. You're anchoring that identity of a woman who is drawn to the wrong people. There's nothing wrong with, for a little bit, looking at your past and going, oh, this happened to me, and therefore I now make these choices, and you have newfound awareness. That's great. But continuing to marinate in your past for years and years and years does not serve you moving forward. The second thing is looking at your subconscious beliefs. Your familiarity bias is going to fuel your subconscious beliefs, and your subconscious beliefs are going to fuel your emotional home. So if you think, am I ever going to meet anybody? There's something wrong with me. You're living in a place of shame, blame, fear, anxiousness, not feeling worthy, undeserving. You may feel like a victim. All of these feelings are not pleasant to feel, and most people will try to get away from their pain and seek pleasure. And unfortunately, a lot of people do that by way of unhealthy coping, becoming a workaholic, staying chronically busy so that they don't have time to feel anything, numbing themselves with wine or other substances at the end of the day, or numbing themselves with, Netflix binges, or numbing themselves on their phones to stay busy, or numbing themselves with other people. Listen, there's no judgment. But at the end of the day, you have to get to a point and realize, do I want to keep living this way? All of your familiarity bias, your subconscious beliefs, and your emotional home determine and dictate the actions you take or you don't take in your life. So let me give you an example of this. We talk a lot with women here who are very successful in their careers. They're educated. They may have multiple degrees. You wouldn't look at them and think, oh, this person gets into abusive relationships. That's not how she portrays herself in the world. However, after 1 or 2 or 3 emotionally abusive relationships, we talk with somebody, an example, she may take 7 or 10 years off dating just to or 5 years off dating, just to give herself a break, just to focus on herself, get back into work, get back into working out, get back to being a good mom for her kids, get back into making new friends, feel like a productive part of society, feel more herself. And then after taking that time off, she'll get right back into dating again. And it doesn't matter the amount of time off that she's taken to work on herself. She'll fall right back into the same unhealthy, dysfunctional pattern in relationship. And sometimes it's worse than before, despite all of the time off that she took. So it's not, if you find yourself in this situation, if you've taken a lot of time off, maybe you got into some hobbies, maybe you got into therapy and you started looking at your past and connecting the dots. Maybe you became more involved in your school, your kids' extracurricular activities. You did these things, right? You did, operative word, did all of the right things. But if you still have that childhood conditioning and the subconscious beliefs, and by the way, if you continue to tell your story over and over and over again, or reanalyze the past on a surface level, you're not going deep enough to shift those subconscious beliefs. So if you still have the subconscious beliefs or the fear or the doubt, could I actually attract a great partner? Is that possible for me? And you've been living with that for the 5 years that you took off dating, you're going to continue to attract more of the same because your beliefs haven't changed. And if you believe, and we see this a lot here, if you believe that on an unconscious level, you're not worthy of having a great relationship, you're going to find all kinds of ways to prove that to be true for you, by drowning yourself in work, by feeling resentful at work. Most of the time, the women that we work with here have unhealthy relationships and romantic partners. But when we widen the lens a little bit, they also have that same pattern in their work lives, in the relationships with their kids. There's a lot of codependency happening in these other life areas. Her relationship with money, her relationship with her family, lack of boundaries, lack of self-respect, and fear of making a different choice, and the doubt of will I ever be able to have a healthy relationship. So Your familiarity bias is your own worst enemy. Your subconscious beliefs and your feeling state, your primary emotional home every day, are your own worst enemy. And these two things, these two gigantic things, are going to determine the outcomes you get or you don't get in your life. And unfortunately, if you keep meeting disappointment in your love life or your dating experiences, that disappointment, the outcomes that you're not getting, are going to turn around and fuel your familiarity bias, fuel the identity of the woman who can never get it right in love. That's going to fuel your emotional home of feeling shame and anger or sadness or feeling like a victim. That's going to fuel the subconscious belief of I'm never good enough, I'm unlovable. And it's going to fuel the actions that you don't take, taking more time off dating, avoiding your love life completely. And it's going to create the outcomes that you are not getting in your love life. So you have a choice. You can continue to, as Einstein says, be insane. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, expecting a different result. And you probably did this with an ex-partner. You saw the writing on the wall, you heard the warning bells, but you continued to believe that it would get better, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And it's like you're banging your head against a wall. You could be doing that same pattern right now. You just don't have a partner to be practicing with. You are doing that with yourself. So you have to, number one, make the decision that you don't want to continue to play small. Most people that we talk with on breakthrough calls, and even to some extent work with as clients, and this is to be expected in helping somebody change their behavior, most people will fight harder to stay in their comfort zone than they will to actually change, because changing is going to require you to get uncomfortable and to face your feelings and to learn how to feel your feelings and to learn how to rewrite the stories that you've been living with and make different choices that are going to put you in positions where you're going to be vulnerable, where you're going to be rejected, where you're going to feel abandoned, and learn how to navigate those feelings in a healthy way rather than coping with them in an unhealthy way. So first of all, you need to make the decision that you are sick and tired, as I like to say, of sitting in your own shit show. The second thing that you need is to be working with an expert who is trauma informed, an expert who knows about CPTSD, an expert who also understands the relationship dynamics between somebody with complex trauma and narcissistic personality disorder, if that's what you have or that's what you've experienced. So you need to be working with an expert who's going to be able to see your blind spots faster and better than you. Most of the people that we work with here know that they're stuck, but they don't know the specifics of why they're stuck, and they certainly don't know the specifics of how to get unstuck. And it can be invaluable and priceless to invest in working with somebody who sees those things quickly. They're an expert at seeing those things, and they're an expert at helping you get past your fear incrementally and get where you want to go in a faster way. If you've been doing a lot of therapy, and just to be honest, most of the people that we work with here have already done a lot of therapy. They've gotten a lot of insights, they've gotten a lot of help and value from that process, but they're still not where they want to be in their relationship dynamics and their love lives. If that's you, it is very wise to consider coaching, because coaching is less focused on your past. We acknowledge your past, but we don't continue to marinate in why you continue to do something and your past is causing you to do this behavior because of X, Y, and Z. We don't continue to analyze in that way. We take where you are and address the fears that you have in this moment and help you rework your psychology and take action that backs up that psychology, reinforces that new psychology so that you get the results that you want. So investing in an expert who is trauma informed, who deeply understands CPTSD and narcissistic abuse, if that is your experience, and then taking consistent action. It's not enough to read books. It's not enough to watch something like this or listen to a podcast. These things can give you insights, But if you have a 20 or 30 or longer year pattern of an identity of, I always get into the wrong relationships, I can never win in relationships, it's going to take consistency, accountability, taking steps and actions every week that are out of your comfort zone. And it's going to mean rewiring your psychology, rewiring the trauma-based thinking and the emotional home that you live in every single day. And listening to a podcast or reading a book will give you insights, but it's usually not consistent enough or deep enough, and you lack the how of how to implement that and get different results. So investing in an expert can help shorten your learning curve dramatically and help you get the results that you want. So just to quickly recap, are you your own worst enemy? Are you standing in your own way after a divorce or a narcissistic relationship or heartbreak of some kind? And you've got these massive walls up and these trust issues. The first thing to look at is your familiarity bias. We tend to go and attract in relationships and other parts of our life, but we're talking about love life here. We tend to attract in our love lives what is familiar, what we know. And what we're familiar with and what we know usually stems back to your childhood conditioning and the beliefs that you took on as a child about yourself. And every partner that you meet in your life, every romantic partner, even down to every boss that you have in your life, every friend that you have in your life, is in some way reflecting back that unhealed wounding or that familiarity. So we have that familiarity bias. That familiarity bias isn't just like, oh, I go with what's familiar. It's actually like a neurological thing. So if you go with a certain type, the neurons in your brain associated with that type and associated with that pattern, the story of I'm not worthy of love, those neurological patterns, they're shorter, meaning the electrical impulses don't have very far to travel, and they're thicker, meaning you're going to quickly go to that story so fast, like, a person who's addicted to cigarettes just lights up and they don't even realize they lit a cigarette. So familiarity bias. Second thing is your familiarity bias fuels your subconscious beliefs and your emotional home. So if you're living in unhappiness every day and you feel, am I ever going to have a great relationship? This is not a good state to be living in. Unfortunately, most people live there most of their lives and they never change anything about that. They just kind of continue to mosey along in life, but never really truly feel happy. And they deal with that feeling by unhealthy coping to give themselves a jolt of happiness by numbing themselves in some way. And then finally, your familiarity bias and your emotional home and your subconscious beliefs all determine the outcomes you're getting in your life. And if you're not getting the outcomes that you want specifically in your love life, that lack of results is going to fuel the belief that something's wrong with me. It's going to fuel the belief that I can't win no matter what I do. It's going to fuel the belief that, I just need to work harder. It's going to fuel the familiarity bias of love is hard and I am unlovable. And if you want to break that, it takes working a trauma-informed plan. It takes consistency. It takes accountability. If you've had a lot of therapy, it's likely going to take having somebody help you get very clear on your goals, because if we're living in survival mode or fight or flight, it's very challenging to get a clear vision of your future and help you overcome the brain wiring and the nervous system wiring that's keeping you locked in that pattern unconsciously. So if you're a professional woman, if you're driven, if you're successful, but inside you feel empty, inside you've already done a lot of therapy, inside you realize, yes, I know I had a bad childhood. I keep getting bad relationships. I know it's because of my childhood, but what do I do about it? You want a plan. You want to move forward. You don't want to keep ruminating about the past. Then I invite you to book a free breakthrough call by going to BethanyDotson.com/talk. The call is best for women who are single, divorced, or in the process of divorce. The biggest thing is that you're completely done with your ex. You are absolutely, I'm never going back. You are like, from this moment forward, I have to change. It's an absolute must that you change. You're successful in other parts of your life. Your love life tends to be the one problem area that keeps bothering you, that keeps repeating a negative pattern. And you've already invested in therapy. You've had some insights. You've had some great value. But you're not where you want to be, and you realize you need some steps forward, not continuing to talk about the past or focus on the past to heal your problem and to get the results that you want. So BethanyDotson.com/talk. I hope you have a wonderful Monday and close out your year on a high note with more clarity about where you're going in the future. And I will talk to you soon. Take care.